November 29, 1943. Skies over Bremen, Germany. A formation of American B-17 flying fortresses drones through thin, icy clouds at 28,000 feet. Flak bursts pepper the sky with black puffs. In the tail turret of one bomber, the Rikki-Tikki-Tavi of the 96th Bomb Group, Staff Sergeant Eugene "Gene" Moran scans his sector, twin 50 caliber machine guns at the ready. Suddenly, boom, a deafening jolt. The entire tail section shears off from the fuselage. Moran's world flips upside down as his turret plunges away from the rest of the plane. Wind howls through the shredded metal. He's trapped in a free-falling coffin, hurtling earthward with no parachute. In mere seconds, the bomber vanishes above, leaving Gene plummeting alone. The next 30 minutes will feel like an eternity. A desperate fight for survival in midair. Earlier that day, RAF Snetterton Heath Airfield, England. Dawn breaks cold and grey on the Norfolk countryside. Ground crews de-ice wings and load bombs under the dim glow of hangar
Watch the
lights.
leading edge, make sure it's clear.
This is the US 8th Air Force's ongoing air
Sarge.
campaign against Nazi Germany. Morale is guarded.
Easy now, watch the
Everyone
casing.
knows the odds of surviving a full tour
All
are
right,
slim.
be secure. Get the next one
In
ready.
1943, only about 25% of bomber crewmen would live to complete their required 25 missions. The others, a staggering 75%, are killed, wounded, or captured before then. Every man on the flight line is aware of the previous month's Black Week, when dozens of bombers were lost in brutal raids. Nonetheless, they press on with steam resolve. Mission briefing. The target for today, November the 29th, 1943, is the
Flak
vital port
suppression will be
city
heavy
of
over
Bremen,
the target, so
Germany.
maintain tight formation.
Bremen
All right,
is a
men,
key
this is
industrial
Bremen.
hub,
Let's make it count.
home to submarine pens, shipyards, and aircraft factories feeding the Nazi war machine. Intelligence reports heavy anti-aircraft defenses and fighter presence. The brass's instructions are blunt: bomb the target and get out. The crews steel themselves, knowing that deep into Germany, they will be out of friendly fighter range for a time. This is daylight precision bombing. High risk, high reward. Moran's B-17F, nicknamed Rikki-Tikki-Tavi, joins the aerial armada. 10 crewmen cram into the flying fortress, pilots Linwood Langley and Benny Cipresso in the cockpit, navigator Jesse Orison, bombardier Don Curtis, engineer Walter Reed, radio operator Sam Amatuli, and gunners at every vantage. Waist gunners Anderson King and Edmund Swedo, ball turret gunner Wilbert Pee-wee Provost, and tail gunner Eugene Moran. At just 19 years old, Gene Moran is the last line of defense at the bomber's rear. Small and agile, he barely fits in the cramped tail turret. For the next several hours, he will kneel or sit in this isolated bubble of plexiglass and aluminum, braving intense cold and enemy fire for the sake of his crew. Before takeoff, Gene pulls on his heavy flak vest and an electrically heated flight suit, protection against both shrapnel and the 50-degree, below zero temperatures at altitude. He checks his twin 50 cal Brownings, mounted just outside his tiny armored enclosure. Ammunition belts are fed and ready. The tail guns have a wide field of fire, but Gene knows if fighters come from dead astern, he is their first target. In Luftwaffe tactics, taking out the tail gunner opens up the bomber to attack from behind. It's a brutal reality. The life expectancy of a tail gunner under fighter attack can be measured in minutes. As one veteran quipped, "Tail gunners, we used to hose them out of the turret." Grim testimony to how dangerous the position is. By 800 hours, hundreds of B-17s and B-24s are airborne and assembling into combat box formations over England. Despite the growing might of the 8th Air Force, weather is a foe today. Thick clouds over the North Sea force many formations to abort. Out of 360 B-17s dispatched toward Bremen, more than 200 turn back due to cloud cover and malfunctioning navigation radars. Only 154 fortresses press on to the target. Rikki-Tikki-Tavi is among them. The shrinking numbers mean fewer guns to defend the group. They know German fighters will sense the opportunity. As the bombers approach the German coast around noontime, tension rises. Jean Moran swivels in his turret, scanning the vast sky. The intercom crackles with Navigator Orison's voice. "Entering enemy airspace. Keep sharp, everyone." Frost crusts the edge of Jean's oxygen mask as he inhales the bitter cold air. He wipes condensation from the glass and tenses. Below, the city of Bremen is obscured by haze and a defensive smoke screen. Suddenly, puffs of black smoke appear at their altitude. The flak batteries have opened up. In moments, the formation is enveloped in exploding steel. The boom-boom-boom of 80 mm flak shells sends shockwaves through the air. Shrapnel pings off Ricky Tikki-Tavi's aluminum skin. The plane bucks and shudders. Up front, Second Lieutenant Langley calls, "Brace, brace," as a particularly close burst spalls the windshield. One bomber off to port takes a direct hit. Jean watches in dismay as an entire wing breaks off that B-17, which spirals down in flames. A parachute blooms, then another. At least some of her crew escape. The formation tightens up, holding on course. Despite the chaos, these crews have a mission to complete. Fighting through flak, they reach the initial point and open the bomb bay doors. At 14:30, bombs away. A ripple of liberation as the 500-pounders and incendiaries fall toward the industrial yards below. But there's no time to watch the results. The battle for Bremen is only half over. Now the real test begins, surviving the trip home. As the formation turns off target, the Luftwaffe pounces. Dozens of enemy fighters, aggressive Bf-109 and Fw-190 interceptors, have been orbiting out of flak range, waiting for the bomb run to end. They dive upon the trailing American bombers. Over the intercom comes the call, "Every Madribu," Gunner dreads. "Bandits, 6 o'clock high. Fighters inbound." Messerschmitt Bf-19s streak in from the rear, cannons blazing. Tracers whip past Ricky Tikki-Tavi. In his tail turret, Jean Moran clutches the triggers and swings his guns toward the first attacker. Tat, 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 tat. His 50 cals spit out bright orange tracers. The German fighter roars straight at him from behind, guns twinkling. Jean can feel the thud of enemy 20mm rounds hammering the B-17's tail. One shell explodes near his turret, cracking glass. For a split second, he locks eyes on the incoming fighter. It flashes by so close he sees the black crosses on its fuselage. He presses his triggers and sprays its belly with bullets as it zooms under them. The 109 rolls away, trailing smoke. Perhaps damaged, perhaps not. There's no time to celebrate. Another pair of fighters is already lining up behind them. Inside Ricky Tikki-Tavi, chaos. The waist gunners shout warnings and riddle the sky with defensive fire. Spent brass shells clatter on the floor. The top turret whirs as flight engineer Walter Reed tracks a Fw-190 passing overhead. The radio operator, Sergeant Amatuli, furiously calls out fighter positions to other B-17s until a burst of cannon fire shreds the radio room. Amatuli is hit and slumps over his set, killed instantly. The bomber's left rudder is shot away, fabric fluttering where control surfaces used to be. Despite the damage, Lieutenant Langley fights to hold formation. They dare not fall behind. A straggler is a dead duck. Another jarring impact, flak again or a fighter's hit. A 20mm shell bursts in the waist, mortally wounding Sergeant Anderson King. The oxygen system is likely punctured too. A sweet smell of glycol indicates a heater coolant leak. The fortress is wounded and losing speed. As Jean swivels to engage another attacker, he hears the pilots over intercom. "We're losing them. Can't stay with the group." Ricky Tikki-Tavi begins to lag behind the main formation, its 4 engines strained. Immediately, like wolves spotting an injured prey, half a dozen German fighters turn their attention to the lone B-17. They come from all directions. A head-on pass from a Fw-190 peppers the nose. Bombardier Don Curtis is killed by cannon shells before he can even grab a gun. More fighters attack from the rear quarter. Gene swivels frantically, firing short bursts to keep them at bay. His ammunition belts feed into the guns. Smoke and the smell of cordite choke his turret. Through the intercom, he catches part of a panicked shout. "We're hit! Engine 3 is burning!" Flames stream from the right inboard engine. Lieutenant Langley feathered the propeller to reduce drag. But Rikki Tikki Tavi is now alone, lagging further behind and descending. Inside the B-17, fire spreads along the wing. The surviving crew know they might have to bail out. Navigator Jesse Orison grabs his parachute and prepares to abandon the nose. In the tail, Gene Moran tries to do the same, but when he reaches for his parachute, his heart sinks. It's shredded to rags. One of those cannon shells that hit the tail punch straight through his stowed chute. It's full of holes, completely useless. Gene realizes with dread that if they must bail out, he has no functional parachute. Before he can process this, fate strikes in an instant. A tremendous explosion, likely an 88 flak shell, finds its mark in their already crippled bomber. In a flash of black and orange, the B-17 literally breaks apart. The whole tail section, from just forward of the horizontal stabilizers, rips clean off the aircraft. One moment Gene was at his guns, the next he is in free fall, still inside his turret, but completely detached from the rest of the plane. The forward section of Rikki Tikki Tavi, carrying the pilots and others, is now 100 feet away in mid-air, hurtling toward its own doom. Gene catches a final glimpse of the front section spiraling down, engulfed in flames. 8 of his crewmates are in there. Tragically, all but one would perish as it broke apart. For a split second, time stands still. The tail section, about 12 feet of fuselage with the stabilizers, is now Gene's entire world. It begins to spin violently, end over end. Inside, Gene is thrown around, desperately grabbing his gun mounts to avoid being flung out the shattered tail opening. The G-forces pin him as the tail tumbles. Blue sky, then brown earth, then sky again, a nauseating cartwheel through the atmosphere. I knew we were spinning around because flashes of blue, green, and brown kept flickering past. One tail gunner later recounted of a similar plunge. Gene likely experiences the same terrifying blur of earth and sky. He tries to bail out, useless. The metal around him is twisted and bent, jamming the only escape hatch. He is effectively entombed in the tail. Even if he could get out, he has no good parachute. Gene's training and instincts kick in. Stay with the aircraft as long as possible. He wraps the remains of his torn parachute around his body like a makeshift cushion, a futile gesture, but all he can do. Down and down he falls, picking up speed. Terminal velocity in a tumbling chunk of airframe comes quickly. The tail hurtles earthward at roughly 100 feet per second, about 6 km/h. But its broken stabilizers miraculously act like improvised wings, slowing the descent a bit by fluttering and flapping. The gyrating tail doesn't drop like a stone. It spirals. This likely prolongs Gene's fall, stretching those seconds into agonizing minutes. Later estimates suggest it took perhaps 10 to 15 minutes for some severed tail sections to reach ground. To Gene, each second must have felt like a lifetime. Inside the tail, it's a scene from a nightmare. The wind screams through gaping holes. Freezing air blasts him. But Gene is numb to the cold now, adrenaline overriding all else. He can scarcely breathe at this altitude. Without an oxygen supply, the hoses were ripped away with the plane. Hypoxia makes his vision swim. In these moments on the edge of consciousness, Gene likely confronts his mortality. "If I'm going to die, I want to get it over with," another tail gunner, Sergeant James Rayleigh, thought during a similar fall. Gene might well have prayed or reflected on his life as the ground looms larger below. He might even have thought of his home in Wisconsin, his family, wondering if he'd ever see them again, but Moran is not finished fighting. Through a tear in the fuselage, he suddenly spots a Messerschmitt 109 swooping nearby. The German pilots are circling the falling tail wreckage, baffled. Later, some would say the enemy flyers mistook the tumbling tail for a strange Allied aircraft attempting a controlled glide. Unsure what it is, 109 cautiously lines up as if to shoot it down. Imagine Gene's incredulity, as if things couldn't get worse. Now he's being attacked while free-falling. But the young American airman's survival instinct kicks into overdrive. If he's going to die, he'll die fighting. He crawls back to his guns, which are miraculously still functional and loaded. Bracing himself against the wildly gyrating tail, Gene returns fire at the incoming fighter. Tet, tet, tet! The tracers lance out from the falling tail section. Incredibly, Staff Sergeant Moran is dogfighting a German fighter while plummeting through the sky. His bullets zip past the 109, and the stunned German pilot breaks off, probably astonished, or thinking this wreck might explode. Another fighter wheels around at a distance, but seeing the tail section still shooting, they hesitate to approach. Gene's insane courage in that moment likely saved him from being riddled by cannon fire in midair. All the while, German flak gunners on the ground have also taken notice of the mysterious object falling from the clouds. Unsure what it is, some batteries reportedly send a few shells up at it. Black flak bursts pop around the descending tail. Gene is caught between the hammer and anvil. His own allies are far away, and the enemy both above and below is trying to finish him off. Yet somehow, through a mix of confusion and his defiant gunfire, the fighters break off their attack. The lonely tail hurtles on, descending below the cloud base. From here, gravity does its work. The ground rushes up, a patchwork of fields and forests in northern Germany. Syke, a rural area about 12 miles south of Bremen, lies directly below. Gene's final moments of descent are a blur. The tail section smashes through the upper canopy of a pine forest, branches snapping violently. One of the spinning horizontal stabilizers snags in the treetops, momentarily slowing the fall. In that split second, much of the kinetic energy is mercifully dissipated. Then, with a bone-shaking jolt, the tail slams into a large tree trunk and halts, wedged among branches just above the ground. The impact is tremendous. The tail section crumples like a tin can. Inside, Gene is thrown forward, his head strikes metal. Everything goes black. Against all odds, Eugene Moran is still alive. The mangled tail of Ricky Tikki-Tavi now hangs in a tree in a quiet German woodland. Sergeant Moran's limp body spills out of the wreckage and onto the cold ground. He has survived a fall of 4 miles without a parachute. But his injuries are grave. His skull is crushed from the impact, shards of metal embedded. He's bleeding and unconscious. For the moment, however, his war is over. The entire descent, from breakup to crash, lasted only a few minutes in real time, but to Gene it must have felt like an eternity. Local German Home Guard soldiers and farmers, having witnessed the bomber's breakup and the strange falling tail, rushed to the scene. They approached the wreckage cautiously, expecting no survivors. Instead, to their astonishment, they find an American airman barely clinging to life amidst the twisted metal. Gene is alive, though just barely, likely saved by the cushioning of the tree branches and the slowing effect of the tail's flapping stabilizers. The fall that should have been fatal has instead left him a broken, bloodied miracle. The Germans extract Moran from the tail wreck. In different circumstances, an injured airman might fear rough treatment or worse. But here, humanity prevails. The soldiers see a young man at death's door and render first aid. Within hours, Gene is moved to a nearby aid station or hospital ward. By a stroke of luck, medical help is at hand. In the POW system, one finds doctors among prisoners. Gene's life is saved by a Serbian doctor, himself a prisoner of the Germans, who performs delicate surgery to repair Moran's shattered skull. Infection is a serious risk, but over the following days, Gene regains consciousness, bandaged and sore, in a hospital bed. He is now a prisoner of war, one of the very few tail gunners to fall from such heights and live to tell the tale. Meanwhile, the war rages on. That same day, the 8th Air Force raid on Bremen, though costly, had some success. Of the 154 B-17s that bombed the target, 13 were shot down by flak and fighters, Ricky Tiki-Tavi among them. In total, over 130 American airmen were missing in action from the mission. Eugene Moran is one of those MIA, though soon reclassified as POW. The Bremen raid's results were mixed. Cloud cover meant many bombs missed. The Allied strategic bombing campaign would continue into 1944, growing ever more destructive. But it came at a horrific cost. In the second half of 1943, the USAF's losses mounted so high that the daylight bombing strategy verged on crisis. Crew like Moran's gave everything, keeping pressure on Germany's industry at a time when fighter escorts were not yet able to cover every mission. Their sacrifice helped pave the way for improved tactics, including the introduction of long-range P-51 Mustang escorts by early 1944, which would dramatically reduce bomber losses and ultimately achieve air superiority. For Gene Moran, the fight for survival continued long after hitting the ground. Once his immediate injuries were treated, he was sent to Stalag Luft 4, a POW camp, to recover among fellow Allied prisoners. In early 1944, he met another airman, Staff Sergeant George Fisher, the very man who parachuted from a different bomber in the Bremen raid and witnessed Gene's tail falling through the sky. In captivity, Fisher heard German guards talk about a soldier found in the tail of the plane and realized it was Moran. Fisher later recounted Gene's incredible survival in a news report, vouching for the truth of his 4-mile tumble. As the war neared its end in 1945, conditions for POWs worsened. Gene endured what he later described as some of the worst episodes of the POW experience. He was among those forced into a winter death march, a 600-mile trek in early 1945 as the Germans evacuated camps ahead of the Soviet advance. Suffering from hunger, exposure, and the trauma of his injuries, Moran somehow pushed onward. He also survived an ordeal on a crowded Hell ship in the Baltic, where POWs were inhumanely crammed for relocation. Each challenge tested the limits of his will to live, but Eugene Moran refused to give up. After 17 months in captivity, on April 26, 1945, he was liberated by advancing American troops. Emaciated and exhausted, he finally tasted freedom again. A survivor in every sense. Back home, Staff Sergeant Moran received multiple honors. 2 Purple Hearts for his wounds, an Air Medal with Oak Leaf Cluster for his valor, among others. In the post-war years, he built a quiet life in Wisconsin, raising a family and serving his community and fellow veterans. For decades, he seldom spoke of that fateful day over Bremen. It was nearly unbelievable and perhaps too painful to relive. Only in his later years did he share the full story, which became the basis of the book Tailspin, aptly named for his astounding fall. Eugene Gene Moran passed away in 2014 at the age of 90, having lived a long life that was quite literally granted by a miracle. His story remains one of the most extraordinary survival tales of World War II. Yet it also shines a light on the experiences of thousands of young men who fought in the air. The tail gunner's position was arguably the loneliest and most dangerous job on those bombers. Isolated in a plexiglass bubble, exposed to fighters and flak, they were truly tail-end Charlies, often the first ones targeted and the last line of defense. Many never made it home. Moran's 12-minute ordeal encapsulates the horror and heroism these airmen faced. It was an extreme example of how quickly fortunes changed in aerial combat, one moment on offense, the next in freefall fighting for life. Back to the quiet forest south of Bremen. In that frozen moment, a shattered tail section hung in the trees, and a young American airman lay in the snow, alive against all odds. Eugene Moran's 12 minutes of terror had indeed lasted forever in his mind. a relentless slideshow of fire, fear, and faith. He fell from the heavens but lived to walk the earth, a testament to human resilience. His survival was nothing short of a miracle, but it was also a result of training, courage, and a refusal to surrender even when all hope seemed lost. More broadly, Moran's experience reminds us of the countless unseen moments of valor in war. Each bomber crew, each mission, held stories of sacrifice and endurance, most less dramatic, but no less important. The Allies' strategic bombing campaign was brutal, costly, and controversial, but it dealt heavy blows to the Nazi war effort and hastened the end of the conflict. It was won through the cumulative courage of crewmen like Jean, who faced death every time they climbed into those flying fortresses. For the men in the bomber's tail, every mission was a step into peril. They knew an attacking fighter or a flak burst could snuff out their lives in an instant. The photograph above shows a B-17 that returned with its tail almost cut in half, a rare lucky crew. Most were not so fortunate. Eugene Moran's bomber did not return that day, but by some combination of fate and fortitude, he survived what should have been certain death. In the end, a tail gunner's 12 minutes that lasted forever is more than just a miraculous survival story. It's a salute to all those who endured the deadly skies of World War II. It asks us to imagine the courage it took to man those guns in sub-zero cold, under fire, minute after minute. And it reminds us that history often turns on such moments of bravery and luck. Jean Moran's 12 minutes ended in survival and eventually victory, for himself and, symbolically, for the cause he served. As the camera fades on the image of a lone B-17 tail section in the quiet woods, we reflect on the line between life and death that these young airmen walked. Eugene Moran walked it and lived. His story, once almost unbelievable, stands verified by eyewitnesses and records. It endures as one of the great legends of the air war. From the farms of Kentucky or Wisconsin to the skies of Europe and back, Gene's journey was incredible. 12 minutes, that's how long it took for Sergeant Moran to fall to earth. But those 12 minutes carried a lifetime of hope and despair. In surviving them, he gave us a story of survival for the ages.